We're going to be looking at all the different sections that will appear within these warm-ups. There are some sets that have maybe one section removed and replaced with a different skill, but for the most part, they're going to cover these topics. So we're going to start with history. And there'll be a little snippet of information for the students to read, and then a question that asks them to dig deeper into that particular subject. So in this case, we're talking about bebop, and we're looking for, other than Charlie Parker, who are musicians that pioneered this music. And we want kids to do some research on their own. A lot of them will get excited about things that they find and bring those in to share with the class. And it's important to note that the history throughout the sets is not in chronological order. I structured it intentionally to match the exercises that fit with the set. I found early on that chronologically based history did not always meet the best progression of skills harmonically, melodically for the students. And so the history goes back and forth a bit, but it always kind of ties in previously. So if we jumped ahead here, then we're going to talk about maybe some things we had heard before. Maybe we jumped to bebop and jumped back to Count Basie, always kind of tying it in together. But I found it more important to tie into the rest of the set and those skills that were going to be worked on. After the history, we go to listening, and this ties into the history and the rest of the set. So in this example, talking about bebop, and we're going to listen to an early recording of Charlie Parker doing Billy's Bounce. And we want them to look at this compared to previous listening examples and comparing that kind of bebop style versus maybe some of the ones we listened to before, like Ellington. And then it's tying into many of these set 6 exercises that we are going to do with this particular chord progression. And when they're answering these listenings, we want them to do so with a level appropriate listening. So if you have a new student to jazz, we want them listening for the form or the interplay of instruments, whereas maybe your top bass player who's at Allstate needs to be talking about the particular ascending line that the bass player plays behind this solo because it matched to this and fit in with this chord progression to this harmony that allowed it to go back down and resolve this tone to this tone. We want those kinds of listenings from our top elite students. But for other students in the middle, we just want them making discoveries that are relevant to where they're at in their jazz progression. And we want to make sure they're giving good examples that aren't just, this was good, I liked this. One note I'll make is the YouTube videos I include. Obviously, YouTube videos sometimes get pulled down, so if you ever find a set where a YouTube video is no longer available, generally the students can Google Charlie Parker or Billy's Bounce and find one that's been up there. After listening, we'll go into long tones and chorales. And so our wind players are really just working on warming up. Tone quality, intonation, listening, getting good air through the horn, and getting warmed up, while this is an opportunity to work on some specific skills with our rhythm section members, also getting them warmed up. And so you'll see in this example, we're using the Billy's Bounce chords, tying that into the whole set 6 progression, but they're just working on, I call this just a chorale. It's basically voicing the chords, and I have them moving the shortest distance possible to be listening for good voice leading through the progression with the rest of the winds. And the rhythm section, the bass player will be working on a specific bassline scale. Maybe it's adding chromaticism into roots. The piano player might be working on a particular voicing, and the drum set player working in this case on limb independence and getting, can you play on the snare drum these rhythms while your right hand is playing a generic swing groove? Do you need to do just quarter notes, or can you add some spang-a-lang on the cymbal while keeping this? Can you do it in time? It's a lot of ands. So that's what they're working on while the winds are getting a chance to warm up. Then we move on to full ensemble articulation, and this is generally some kind of melody that ties into what we're doing. So you can see that this melody has some chromaticism, a little bit more eighth note line, trying to keep somewhat in line with the bebop skills while also working with the rhythm section on their focus for this particular set. And I always encourage the wind players sing first. We practice all the time singing with good articulation, using do, dot, da, dit, getting those sung and internalized trying to mimic what they hear to use good articulation. We talk a lot about ghosting notes. Are there opportunities where things need to be ghosted or brought out of the texture? Generally, if we're looking at an eighth note line with an and that kind of goes down in pitch, we want to ghost that, where if it goes up in pitch, we want to have that be a little bit more accented. So here, do, di, da, do, va, do, da. This C right here is almost not even played because we're trying to ghost it, as opposed to the kind of emphasize all the ands. Do, di, da, do, va, do, di. Sounds a little strange, not necessarily in that bebop style. So getting them to do those. Bringing back, here's a slightly longish note. Are you adding a forte piano crescendo, giving it some direction in these cases that we've had before in previous sets? So we're always trying to build on articulation studies from before and getting them to build just kind of an internalized repertoire of articulation that they're going to see in their music. And then the rhythm section is doing things in relationship to this melody. Might be comping a specific way. For the drum set, we're constantly trying to expose them to various forms of notation because drum set notation can be a nightmare. You sometimes see slashes with nothing, like barely even the word swing sometimes. And then sometimes there's almost too much. So I constantly change up what they see or don't see to try to get them used to all the different ways they're going to be reading music. So we start off with just, well, it's swing. Don't know much about what we got. I know I'm supposed to fill here. I don't know what the melody is, but I know I'm supposed to fill. But then down here, okay, I see these things. I've been working on setting up the and of 4 and the and of 2. Here's a chance to practice that. So this is a great way to tie in skills that both groups are working on at the same time. Next, we move on to a music theory section, which can be a little bit daunting for students. They don't necessarily like to jump in at first. But I do think it's important for them to have a basic foundation of music theory, especially if they're going to go anywhere in their improvisation. We want them to be able to do basic things like outline chords, and so they're going to have a foundation. We start very simple. Can you number a scale? We want students to use those numbers. I personally prefer to use numbers when we're talking about theory. So if we know how to play a scale, and we know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and now I say, well, let's make a minor chord out of that. 1 flat 3, 5. We can use those skills of lowering the third to help us kind of create chords and use them in transcription. So we're always using numbers as we build on this theory. In set 6, we're looking at chord function, getting students to recognize 2-5-1s, one of the most important chord progressions that they'll see, getting them to identify them, understand how they relate to the key, the 2 of the key, the 5 of the key, etc., giving them some examples, and then just challenging them. How many keys can you play a 2-5-1 in? I like to use on a previous set, we do the circle of fourths. I like fourths because we're always resolving 5 to 1, 5 to 1 as we move clockwise. Maybe we go back, now it's a 2-5-1. And so I like to do that so they can use that circle of fourths to help them practice their 2-5-1s. And so this is another point of making sure that you're tiering the information relevant to the students. So in this case, my beginner students, I might just ask them, can you outline 3 different 2-5-1s? The top jazz band, we're going through the whole circle. And so just tiering it to what they can do, but exposing them to it nonetheless. Then we generally go to a transcription. There'll be a link included to the transcription. Again, hopefully the videos stay up, and I try to, when possible, give you the minute to go to listen. In this case, they're transcribing J.J. Johnson's first chorus on Billy's Bounce. And when doing transcription, I recommend the students listen multiple times till they can sing the solo, even sing the solo without the recording, and then work through the notes on their instrument. I put over here, some students find it helpful to play on piano for transcription, which I think is fine. I think there's value in doing it on your own instrument, but some kids tend to visualize and hear things a little bit better on the piano with the music going than their own instrument at first. I have the students write the numbers for the solo based on concert F major scale. So Again, we're using numbers because now we can take those numbers and we can move them into any key we want. This whole set 6 is really focusing on a B flat blues. That's what the exercises have been in. So this is a great opportunity. Most of the time Billy's Bounce is in F, but what we're focusing on more than Billy's Bounce is just the use of 2-5-1s in a blues chord progression. And so we're sticking with this B flat, and this gives students a chance to practice transposing. Cool, I learned this solo in F. How do I put it in the key of concert B flat? I also really like to use this when you get to set 6 for using the notes against the chords also as a cool way to make discoveries on what JJ did relative to the exact harmonies at those moments, as opposed to just thinking one giant key. So transcriptions are a great way to get the students listening, just internalizing the nuance and style of these amazing musicians. And then I generally end with an improvisation. It can be really intimidating for students to want to solo, especially in front of their peers. But I try to, at least every month or so, make the students take solos in some capacity. Some are a little bit more reluctant than others, so it might not be all the time for some of those students that I know have some severe anxiety over it. But I do at some point make them all take a solo, because this is such an important part of the jazz language. I think we're doing a disservice if we're not exposing them to this. Some students are naturally inclined to want to do this, others are very scared of it. But we want to create a judgment-free zone for these students to be able to take solos in and work on this skill. And we want to give them as much help and information to be successful as possible. So in this one, for example, we're still on this Billy's Bounce. We're comparing them to the set 2 chord changes, because these are a lot more complex in some ways than the set 2. We get to do some 2-5 things, so we're looking through here. Mention that 2-5 does not always have to go to a major 1. And so looking at this, getting them to identify these 2-5-1s, having them jump out to them, or maybe they're going to eventually be a 3-6 2-5-1, but just getting them to see that minor to dominant motion and having it jump out to them, and showing them that it can be used in a blues to serve certain substitutional function. And we want them, circling and identifying those, and then taking solos over theirs. And there's always a play-along track for them to take solos with at home, so maybe they can practice those first at home and not be as intimidated then to come and stand up with their peers. And that kind of closes the sets out. Just a few snippet looking at some of these. This is what the sets look like. Here's the trumpet one. When they get down to these sections, I try to always make them super editable, so you can type in the boxes and the students can submit those to you and take notes for themselves. We'll look here. Here's a piano one, so we can see there's some comping that we're doing. And then bass line, we're doing some walking. And so you can kind of see how it correlates to everybody. When you say, okay, we're on the long tone section, everyone's kind of in the same spot, but people have different things that they're working on there. So that's kind of the overview of every section that generally appears. As I said, there are a few places where I substitute out a transcription and instead we're doing a circle of fourths exercise or something. But for the most part, they follow this progression. So enjoy.